Okay, so we are gonna do this live. Okay, what that means is that I don't have any questions prepared, right? But and I really want to just I'm looking at the chat. I want to hear what people are saying, right? So if anyone has any questions, or please just pop them in the chat. I'll just fill them. And if anybody wants to speak, feel free. Let me know. Raise your hand, and I think Shuju can actually let you speak. Cool. Sounds good. All right. Okay, let's get started. All right. First of all, as you guys know, I am incredibly excited for the vote tomorrow. I think it's going to be a very important one for the may I say the industry, right? Because I think if we actually get this right, then I think we could actually be pioneering a way to allow others to really kind of have a pioneer way to allow a very synergistic kind of working model, right? Between DAOs, teams, and communities. Okay, yeah. So I think to get started here, I think no, there's no popes today, guys. This is a simple town hall, right? I'm not as fancy as Cash. Cash is the man. We just do simple stuff here. All right, cool. All right, so let's start it. Okay, I think the first question I ask is like, guys, why do you guys? I mean, you guys are definitely proven people in the community, right? And I said this yesterday, in the chat, but I'll say it again. Like I seen you guys work for last few years, and the reason why kind of this came together is because I've been observing these guys for a long time, last few years, and I know that they're in it for very pure reasons. Because even when there was like no very little capital in the space, and everyone left Solana, and these guys are still here, right? So yeah, so I guess I really want to understand like why you guys had such a deep conviction about community, and kind of like what made you guys stay on when everything was shit. Yeah.
Should we do a question
Yeah.
order moving forward?
Yeah,
I'll go
just,
first.
just chat,
Yeah,
just chat, just chat. Yeah.
yeah. So I think like for me, I'd worked like I'm a really, really big proponent of co-creation. Like it's my background. I went to school for music actually, and I love the way in which musicians sort of co-create. And worked in Web 2, worked and did all that stuff, and didn't really find any compelling way to co-create in a traditional job. But when I came into Solana, and I think it was like in August of 2021, my first experience was like in an NFT project, which of course rugged, but everybody in there was making stuff together. And I think that was super, super, super fun. And then basically the next year, 2 years was like a venture in finding other people to make stuff with. And so to me, that's like the most compelling and interesting. And also the rewards for making stuff together are outsized. So it's perfect. I love it.
I feel like the key you say is co-create, right? Because I really feel like, because what are the big motivations for me at Jupiter, right? Is really about co-creation, right? And I think people don't really think that way. But if I see a successful project, right, and I mean long term successful, right, not like short term, right, it really is a co-creation process, right? There's like there's different people or different talents doing very different things, right? And the wonderful thing about the wonderful thing about crypto, right, in my own opinion, right, and certainly the most successful is Bitcoin, right? It's actually a very strong co-creation process, right? It's like, and everyone co-creates something, and then just very different people in a very autonomous way, right? Just goes ahead and does something, right? And the generative output of that something, right, is like tremendous value, right? Not just in financial sense, but also in a very in a very collaborative and like in a spiritual sense, right? Yeah. So I definitely feel the co-creation be like crazy. Yeah. How about you guys? Yeah. How about everyone else? How about Slaw?
Yeah, I have a slightly different answer than Chemo. I would say that I really believe that the opportunities here, they're not only uncharted, but you can really create your own very unique sort of career here based on your own skill set. It's just a completely untamed wilderness at this point. And the beautiful thing about that is there's no pretense. Your value is your value, regardless of if you have a slug PFP or a monkey PFP or some silly animal creature PFP. The value you provide is really all that matters. And that was my message to the cat that's in the uplink call. Like, guys, just get involved, participate, do all these things, find like-minded people, and you can really create something special here that you can't create in the real world. And I do think this will consume the real world at some point.
I think it would. I really think it would. And I feel like what I find interesting is the whole unique career thing, right? Because In fact, like the whole work group concept is a way to create the creation of unique careers, right? To be really hard to replicate elsewhere, right? And also and that's also the reason why I think that we really put in a lot of effort as on my end and at the team's end to kind of set aside a certain like scope and budget, right? That we think is a compelling way, right? To really kind of bring more talented people into the scope, right? And I'm sure that many in the audience here, right, is also thinking the same way, right? Around like, hey, how do we how do we get involved, right, in this community, right? Not just maybe not Jupiter in Web3, right? How do I successfully kind of anchor and become the most famous slug in history, right? And by the way, guys, we are all honored to be here today because slug is the most famous slug in history, so we have the most famous slug in history here, and he became the most famous slug in history, right? By participating, like by being one of the best like participants in the space. And as you said, he and you're a great example, right, of someone who created a very unique career, right? Just by being there, and I think that's actually it's a really amazing thing to see, I think, yeah. So yeah, how about Durden? How about you? Yeah. And for some context for Durden, I think he has been OG, man. I think he has been OG on Solana DeFi since day one in so many fucking Discords and so many fucking like Twitter and calling out shit everywhere he goes, right? So yeah, Durden, what inspires you, man? Why did you stay on this space even when everything was just going to shit, But you were there every day, It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think at bottom there's just a lot about the world as it is, specifically like finance, that I do not like. Actually, like everything I've learned about finance basically started when I started learning about crypto. I basically knew very little before crypto, and only once I began getting into crypto did I get motivated to learn, and then gradually learned like how cumbersome things are in TradFi and how much better DeFi can make things. And obviously, like crypto is like much more than just about DeFi, but it's just like an area that really connected with me. And so, like, I want DeFi to become the norm, the thing that powers finance around the world. Just like the permissionlessness and getting rid of middlemen and aspects like that are really exciting to me. So yeah, that's a strong motivator for me.
It is really interesting to say that because I mean, judging from your threads, I would think you know everything about finance before DeFi. So it's actually really interesting to know that. It's actually really interesting to know that the other way. You join DeFi and then you're like, okay, finance TradFi stuff, right? And I agree 100% with you, man. It's like once you kind of like overcame the initial learning curve, right? And then and it's really a different story, right? And DeFi and I will also say this right now. DeFi is actually what makes this whole thing possible, right? It's like now, precisely right. I think someone was saying that it's incredibly cool to see people all over the world collaborating, right? I think DeFi enables that, right? Because I mean, like it or not, I think the fight like finances are actually financials are very important, right? I think what DeFi allows us to do is that DeFi allows us to kind of construct some primitives, right? Like DAOs and tokens and liquidity, right? That allow like people like allow us, right, to kind of like do this experiment together, right? So I think so I feel like when people talk about DeFi, they talk about the financial part of it, but what they don't really understand, I think, is how DeFi also empowers, right? Communities, right? To form and collaborate, right? And I think that's actually one big reason why I think DeFi will eventually kind of like overtake TradFi, because the ability to form not just like create money but also capital systems and also community is just massive. I think that's great.
Yeah. I'd like to touch on that for a second. I think like one of the main reasons that I'm interested in Jupiter is like, for the last few years, it's been DeFi. And I have my favorite word, as Slug knows, is comfy or comfi, community finance, and this idea of little nodes and communities all over the internet and all over the world, sort of coming together and adding their liquidity or their money or their ideas together, and then being able to make a meaningful amount of money or sort of become their own bank as a community. Like there's credit unions in the real world which are community based, but there's no real sort of analog to that in Web3 yet.
Yeah, I think so, and I feel like we might not be that far away from the future, right? yeah, I don't think we might not be that far away from the future. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to have a community only lending pool. Who knows? It could be pretty cool. No, I think about it, right? Why not? Yeah. Seb, your turn, man.
I think
Yeah.
Durden's pretty close to that.
I think like a big motivator for me, and the reason why I got like excited about DeFi a few years ago is because it reduces the threshold to participate in the financial world for the regular person, people like me and all the cadets here. Like the traditional way to go about finance is that you have to be like a creditor investor to participate in investment rounds, and through tokens and crypto we've seen too that like most people can participate in IDO if they want to, right? For example, the LFG launchpad is way more available. It's like for the people versus for how it would be in the real world in an IPO. Like that regular person would not be able to participate in an IPO with $100. So I think for me a big thing is just it makes participation much easier in the financial world. And with that said, like that empowers the individual to be able to take lead in their financial life as well in a much better way. So that's one of the core things for me, that it sort of like creates more of an equal opportunity than it was before with TradFi. So that's the notion of DeFi that I'm super fascinated about myself. When it comes to like the aspect of communities and why I've always been so fond of it and I like it is, to be honest, it's from my gaming hobby from when I was like a young teenager. We just randomly came together with internet strangers and created teams and clans and guilds and whatnot that turned into like huge things. Like for example, people played like this MMORPG such as World of Warcraft, and people just randomly got together from across the world and created guilds with thousands of members and coordinated like efforts there. And I think like I see a lot of similarities within DeFi communities or NFT communities from the gaming world as well. And so like when I think back on it, when I was like a young teenager, I think that's where the kind of the fondness of the community aspect came about for me. And ultimately what it is, it's about like empowering a group of people to take lead as a group, as a cohort, anonymous like pixelated apes and slugs on the internet can like kind of get together and create something beautiful. And I think with the tokens involved in crypto, we have a really cool opportunity to kind of coordinate our efforts in a unique way compared to how it was before, where the tokens like sort of like both provides like a aspect of like proving your social standing within the community to a degree perhaps, but also it serves as a perfect like governance vehicle as well in a decentralized manner too. So I think there's so many opportunities to sort of like coordinate efforts among strangers on the internet to create something beautiful together. And that's what I've seen like in all the different DAOs I've been involved with myself as well. It's just a bunch of total strangers, coordinating through these kind of token mechanics and governance approaches to do really cool shit. So I guess that's why I'm excited about it, a little bit of background on like how I kind of got introduced to internet communities to begin with when I was a teenager. We're talking about like 20 years ago now, but yeah.
You mean 30? Sorry. Cool. Yeah, I get that, right? I think I kind of forgot to do some basic intro, right? I think Seb has been. I think let me take a step back, and then let's share a little bit about what I know about these guys, right? So Seb has been working. Like Seb actually has been. I actually really respect Seb because Seb always take on the hardest fucking assignments. Right, like the reason I'm being stable down, right? It's like I think that many people left it for that, but this fucker just went in there and then like read the community, read the team, and even me, and I was like, hey, you're gonna do this stable thing with us, man. And I'm like, okay, you know what? And then he even got me to support it, right? I'm like, okay, fine, let's do it. So and like and Seb is like and Seb did that, and it's fucking amazing. And Durden has been I knew Durden from long time ago, like OG, right? And like just incredibly grateful to Durden for like, always being there. Like and you guys have no idea, man. You're new to crypto, new to Solana. You guys have no fucking idea how OG Durden is, man. Like Durden is like literally the most OG community member you can find, right? And just always there, always the same, always slightly asshole, but always cool, Yeah, that's Durden. And Slog, I started noticing Slog's, like long form writing. I actually DM'd him about I think a year ago, saying that he writes really well, right? And then since then, I think he has been working like tirelessly on Soul Incinerator and just keep being in the news for the right reasons, right? Including being featured by Matt Levine, right? That was pretty awesome, yeah. But yeah, Slock has amazing work ethic, right? And a kid like Kimo, actually like before JWG, I wasn't too familiar with Kimo's work, right? But since then I've began diving in, right, and been working with him a ton. And Kimo is amazing. Like Kimo is just such great energy, despite his mustache, right? You look at his mustache, you'll be like, this guy, probably a douche, right? But it's actually not a douche.
I'm gonna
He's a
cry.
great guy,
I'm crying.
right? So
I'm
don't form
actually
impression,
crying
okay?
right now.
Like don't look at the mustache and go like no, don't be like me, okay? Don't judge him, okay? Like mustache is like he's a great guy, okay? Just so you know, okay? Cool. So don't vote no because of the mustache, okay? Right? I know you
I'll
might do
shave
that.
it off. I'll replace it with a Jupiter tattoo.
It's okay. Cool. Sounds good. All right. So I think. All right. Okay. So now you've done the basic intro, and I think I repeated many times over how awesome you guys are. Right. Let's cut to the chase. Okay. Now, start the vote. Right now, why should let's just put it very bluntly. Okay. You guys know me, right? I want to be as blunt as possible. Okay. So tell me your own words, right? Why should someone vote for this? Like what? I mean, we'll get to details of the exact thing later on, right? But before getting the details about what the thing looks like and what you guys are planning to finalize as the proposal, right? Let's ask a very basic question, okay? Like, why should a Jup voter, right? Vote for you guys. Like, why should do that? Like, why? Yeah.
I'll jump in first, and I guess we can do the same order. I think the kind of the core thing around this entire vote to me is precedent. Like I think the future of Jupiter is many different working groups, and I believe that it's important to set some sort of precedent that these groups deserve to be paid not only in some sort of USDC amount, like a normal job would, but also to be allocated a certain amount of Jupiter sort of for a long-term alignment with the mission. And I think it's important that those allocations or the Jupiter allocations are vested for a significant sum of time. But long term, I believe that these groups are sort of I think the analogy goes that if the DAO is a body, then the working groups are the arms and hands doing most of the bulk of the work for the DAO. So I think that is kind of the big core piece for it for me.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I think like in order to have like a successful DAO, it's important to focus on the organizational part of the DAO, like the O of the DAO, right? And that is essentially what the core working group is about here, and especially like in the first 12 months here, is to really do as good of a job as we can to create like sustainable processes together with the community, so we can really focus on lifting up the cadets and the community into like the stage here, like opening the door for cadets to participate. And like since we are like thousands of participants here, we need to be focused on like pretty good like building up processes together with the community in a like fashion with where we have a long-term perspective of things as well, so it's scalable too. So with that said, like we want to put in hard work like we already done so far, showed a little bit our metal here, but we want to continue to do so and create a good fundament for the DAO to stand upon. And that includes like being able to have seamless and smooth way for cadets to create working groups. For example, Meow mentioned the Reddit working group, that idea yesterday, right? Okay, how do we go about that? We need to coordinate those efforts in a meaningful way as well, where it's not just like decisions taking top down, but sort of more of a flat organization, if you guys get what I mean. So that's what we want to do and put a lot of effort into it as well. So the budgets is the USDC for that is to make sure that we have food on the table while we're doing this. And then at the same time, we want to participate in the Jupiter DAO or in the Jupiterverse or the Jupiter United Planet in the long run here as proper DAO participants. So this J.U.P allocation is for a long-term alignment between the core working group and the DAO mission. So yeah, Stork?
Yeah, the case I would make is this. I think the benefit of voting for this is just several magnitudes greater than any of the risks, just because the risk, for one, the risk is limited, right? From the vesting times, from our social reputations on the line, and et cetera, et cetera. Also, it's only a very small amount of the DAO allocation on the line, which will be replenished. But there is a tremendous upside here, and that's from the templates that we set. Because if the work group model works, of which we're going to be a core component in setting up all of this stuff and creating the standards of, we're really the first to pioneer it here. The value returned to Jupiter just cannot be measured at this stage. It would be so immense. Ultimately, it is an experiment because it hasn't been tried before. But in the totality of all of my experiences over the last 3 years of working in digital communities, everything kind of indicates to me that it should work. So the core issue, I think, is, and this is something that every NFT project faces, although we're not an NFT project, is how do these digital communities allocate resources in a meaningful way based on contribution? And the NFT model of passive activity, sort of passive staking, is just broken beyond repair and has proven itself to not work, even in the greatest of blue chip projects. You really need to reward the most active and impactful and ambitious members of your community while also creating as many baskets to not put all of your eggs in just one, right? And I think that's what the work model is going to do here, because it's not just going to be us. It's not just going to be us and Cash. It's going to be a bunch of work groups ultimately, and that's the vision.
Yeah, so I don't have too much to add. I think everyone said a bunch of things that I was thinking as well. But I guess like taking a step back, I think the whole purpose behind this is that we want to attract the best talent. And we want to keep growing the group of people that are working to further Jupiter's cause. And yeah, this is like that first step that will incentivize the core working group and then will allow us to expand that to new working groups and increase that talent pool. And that'll allow us to, or not just us, but all the working groups to create, ideally, the point is like to create more value than the value that's being used to incentivize that talent. And so, yeah.
So actually, thanks everyone for the answers. I think, by the way, there are a bunch of questions in the chat, so I'll get to them, right? But before that, I want to touch on this whole concept a little bit more, right? I think Slot really, Slot really had a really good, like, an elegant way of putting it, right? Whereby talk about precedence, right? Okay, so for a very long time, right? I think I really resonate when Slot talk about the gap, right? Because what we have seen in Web3 again and again and again is that we pay lip service, right, to the word DAO or community, right, or participation, right? We pay lip service to them. And why do we pay, why do I say that? It's because and actually one of the things that, and even though I take a lot of shit for that, right, is that I think we tend to actually use those terms in a very loose way, right? We don't actually mean them, right? We don't actually mean the DAO, right? We don't actually, and DAO, like, votes to make impact, right? And when we talk about community, we don't really invest time, right, in the community, informing it, right? And then when we talk about participation, right, we don't actually set aside resources, right, to reward participation, right? Right? So those are three things that I think I really did not appreciate. I did not think was working, right? So and actually the reason why I think so, I started talking to Seb on this thing like pretty early on about kind of how do we scope the DAO in a way that it actually makes sense, right? The DAO can actually, whatever the DAO decides on, actually is impactful, right? Right? Firstly, right? The DAO might not vote on everything, right? But whatever it does vote on is impactful. Does it make sense? Right? So versus having versus saying something big like DAO is everything, blah blah blah, and actually not having any point, right? No, very important. Whatever the DAO scope is limited, the DAO has its scope, and whatever the DAO vote on is impactful and important, right? That's actually one thing. It's important, right? Now, the second thing is that we're gonna put in immense amount of efforts, right? So I can tell one thing, right? For us and stuff, like, community is as important as product, right? And that's something that I think you're gonna see us like do again and again, right? Like we're gonna really build in that like every week, right? Every day, every week. And then the last part of it is participation, right? Now, where rubber meets the road is resources. Okay, we can talk about caring about resources all day long, but you have to actually have a model that distributes resources, right, in a way that grow the whole system properly, right? And in a way that doesn't actually create like weird incentives, right, around like who gets what, right? Right? It's that important. Okay, let me say again, right? you have to have a scalable mechanism, right? Where we actually have a way of distributing large amounts of resources, right? In a way that is transparent and fair and community driven, right? Or who gets what, right? Because you can, but yeah, so that's actually very important, okay? And we'll get to that later on. Cool, right? But I think those are actually, I think, the three things that's very important to talk about when we talk about kind of whole other WGs, right? And one last point was and then going back to this vote about CWG, right? Is that I think I really think that the whole precedent thing is that I think the reason why I think Slot is right in a sense the precedent is because I think I really I swear I cannot think of a better group of people to start this experiment with, right? Because again, right, like if this experiment, if for example, guys think about it, right? If the vote passes, right, and the CWG doesn't perform, or we don't want to perform, then it's very bad, right? Not just for me, but for everybody, right? And we don't want that, right? So that and that's the reason why we actually want to do that, and that's the why this is not taken lightly, okay? We didn't just form a group and do a vote and then or do stuff. No, we didn't. We actually really spent like months, right, preparing this and scoping it and doing everything, okay, to make sure that this is a good start, yeah. So I think that and that's the reason why that's the reason I'm extremely comfortable, right, going forward with this, yeah. So just so you know, this is actually a very long and thought through process, on things. Cool. All right, so there are a bunch of other questions around, so let me just jump right to it, okay? Now, one question is that, okay, if the 12-month period, what is your preference? So you guys laid out a number of options, right? In the proposal, right? Can someone paste a proposal link in the chat just so everyone gets it again, right? And better yet, can someone print a screenshot? Can someone put a screenshot of those options in there so everyone can see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. My mic is broken. No way. How about now? Better or no?
Yeah, you're good. You're good now.
I
I'm
got
good
it.
now.
Cool.
Okay, sorry about that. Cool. All right. Yeah, but take a look at a screenshot now, right? Take a look at a screenshot. Okay. Cool. I think options. Right now, the question in the chat is like, how do you guys come up with the options, and what options do you guys prefer? I think it's the right one. Yeah.
Yeah. 1 sec. I'm also grabbing the poll. So I think this was kind of a very experimental process and trying to figure out exactly how this will work, because there's, like I said earlier, we're setting a precedent sort of for all the future work groups. I think the important consideration here is, again, one, how long it's all vested for, and how long this commitment when you sort of spin up a work group is for, and then also when you get those actual tokens, right? Like the important thing here is that, like, I didn't have to dox, I didn't have to do any of this stuff. How do you establish trust with a community or any work group in a meaningful capacity? And I think the answer there is working for what is essentially a year before you get any tokens. So each of the numbers sort of corresponded to, we kind of based it off of what people got on the LFG, or sorry, the airdrop, the Jupiter airdrop, and then scaled up as according to what we believed was a fair amount for somebody who's so close to the DAO. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in there.
Yeah, sure. When it comes to this vesting and the cliff periods, the question was, I guess, like the difference between what was preferred between 6 and 12 months. I think, like as Lord touched upon previously, we're setting a precedent here for other future work groups as well. And I think it's fair for the DAO to be able for the next 12 months evaluate the impact of the core working group in this particular, and after that the vesting can continue for another 12 months. So essentially it's like a 24 months vesting in the highest option and a 12-month cliff. So that 12-month cliff means that after 12 months some tokens will get distributed. So I think it's fair for the DAO to have this 12 months period, or 6. But 12 months is something that I'm comfortable with to evaluate the impact of the relevant working group, in this instance, the core working group. So, because ultimately we work for the DAO. And I think a nice way to go about things is to first show what we did and get paid for it afterwards. Usually when you take a job, you don't get paid for the job until you accomplish the job, sort of. So that is sort of the perspective of the vesting and the cliff periods. I hope that answered the question there.
I think the question is, what do you prefer?
Well, I think by setting a precedent, I think 12 months is fine. Like personally, and I can speak for the rest of the working group members here, we're in this for the long run, for like a decade more, you know. So
You
it
need to
doesn't really matter. So, but
Let's
so it's not that big of a detail for us. But on the other hand, we're setting a precedent for everyone else too. And I think 12 months cliff is fair for the DAO and fair for future working groups that want to participate and work for the DAO. So and a 24-month vesting period in general is a pretty good setup as well, because this J.U.P tokens is for long-term alignment. That's what it is for. The USDC in the treasury is for paying for the operations and stuff, right? So yeah, Lorg, do you have something to comment related to this?
Yeah, I would just double down that my own personal preference, and I was even like kind of annoying about this, was the 12-month cliff with the 24-month vesting, just for one, because that's what the team is doing, and second, it commits us to the longest time span, I think, and I just felt like that would be the most energizing of the options, because I think getting all of that up front probably wouldn't be as long-term motivating as getting it 2 years from now, which is what we're sort of leaning towards and strategizing for. So
like the to add on to that, right? So the answer for you guys is that you guys prefer a longer vesting period and a bigger amount, right? Bigger
Yes,
part.
correct.
Awesome, great. And I'm sure I'll see you guys propose for that, right? I guess, So one thing that's just important to take note of here, right, is that I think the way to think about it, right, is that the WGs don't work for the DAO. That's not the right idea, I think, but the WG works for the Jupiters, right? And works for crypto ecosystem, right? Because again, like the Jupiter goal is to move forward Jupiterverse and the crypto, right? So that is what we're all working for, right? But I think the DAO is assessment, right? The DAO assesses, right? Whether like how whether it makes sense or not, right? Whether it's good or not, right? So that's one thing. So I think that's an important clarification. That I think is actually more accurate, right? It's not so much looking for the DAO, but more the DAO has the right to decide certain things, right? I think that's the point. And guys, I think the reason why this is actually very important, right, is because like it really behones the groups, right, to really present a good case, right? For this, right? And this is actually very different from grant models, right? Now, actually, there's actually one thing that's actually very, very different from grant models, right? Grant models are usually given on a very narrow project, right? And often to people who haven't done anything before, right? And often without any track record or or accountability, right? And because accountability is actually really, really hard to give for grants, in the sense that, and that's the reason why we work on this group model, right? Because the reason is that like things change like crazy, like guys, you just have no idea, man. When working in the work groups and stuff, right, when working in the CWG, the scope just kept changing, right? And that kind of like nimbleness is actually not possible in a DAO setup. And you guys and you guys coming in wrong, right? But then I've seen many grants things, and those don't work, right? But what work groups want to do instead is that they want to create a situation whereby a group of very talented people who understand the team well, the community ecosystem well, is able to work in a very nimble and focused way, right? With everybody, right? Yet as not being accountable, right? And the way the accountability is achieved, right? Is via that both in this process, right? Whereby guys, I mean, like you know this again, this is a real vote because like we are here preaching so hard, right? For it, come on, I'm saying this is actually very important, right? Guys, this is real because we are here preaching really fucking hard, right? Right? And if it's not a real word, this won't happen, right? But it's really important because like in us actually in us and the WGs working so hard to pitch this thing, right? I hope that you guys will understand much better, right? Which you guys wouldn't if this didn't happen, right? So I think that's actually really, really important to do. Yeah.
Yeah, there's an audience question I'd like to answer if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Okay, it's from Tim. Everyone loves Tim. Tim, we love you. He said, I saw that the options include more community initiatives with increased J.U.P funding. Does this mean the J.U.P would be used to fund community initiatives, or does it have to do with increased involvements from the CWG? So, Tim, we were talking last night after the poll we placed in the Cat Debt chat. The Cat Debts overwhelmingly voted for the 5 million option. We decided we wanted to ask for a little bit more USDC in return from coming off of the J.U.P amount a little bit. And the reason for that is because we want to be able to pay people in liquid USDC for their work as they do it, However, we also do want to use a very sizable portion of the Jupiter amount for long-term incentivization. So that's the important distinction, is that we're asking for a little bit more USDC than the proposal, a little less Jupe. We can pay people for their work, cat debts for their work. There's a guy making a website, their chemo needs some design work, et cetera, et cetera. But also we will have initiatives for more longer term stuff as well, which we would use a very sizable amount of the Jupe for. So does that answer your question, Tim?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think I think one thing to kind of clarify about this funding, right, is that this funds the CWG, right? And it doesn't fund, it wouldn't include like other WGs, right? Other WGs that set up would do the same process, right? It will it'll be incubated within it'll be incubated either by the team or by other WGs and stuff, right? And then do sufficient amount of proof of work, right? And go to a DAO like we are doing now, right? So guys, today what we're doing is that we're not, this vote is not just about the funding of the CW, it's not just about the funding, but also the whole process, right? We're trying to figure a whole process, not just for us, but for Web3 in general, right? That where different people can come on here, and basically I think if we can figure a good way to like incubate work groups, get them in to do and like get them, and then let them do stuff in a way that's highly productive, right? And get in front of DAO for the voting, right? And then have a period of time where the DAO actually can decide, right? To cut out, like to have the leverage to cut the cut, right? So actually that will actually be pretty powerful, yeah. Oh, and Kimo said something important here. He said that like, okay, 3 million will be among the current WG members, right? And 1.5 million will be given to other allocations. And also that's actually that's actually a very important point, because you actually, because again guys, one important thing about this whole work group concept, right, is that we want the work groups to be nimble, right? And have resources to actually both execute operations and also get new people in, right? So actually, it's actually it will be really important for them for work groups. So actually, the important thing here is that work groups should also kind of budget more than what they actually need, right? Because they actually would need a way, right, to kind of get other people into the loop as well, right? So that's actually very important, Yep. Cool. So thanks, Kimo, for answering that question here. Actually, what am I saying is, Kimo, why don't you just take a couple of minutes to talk about answer here?
Yeah. So I think after doing the poll in the cadets, we thought most people would vote for the middle option. Most of them voted for the 5 million Jupe option. And what we realized is, right, so the DAO allocation is 100 million Jupe and 10 million USDC. And I think there's a really, really lovely symmetry in that helps future work groups understand, how much Jupe do you even ask for? Because that's a really difficult question. So the way we are planning to edit the proposal, and this will go live before the final vote, is that we'll ask for 4.5 million Jupe and 450K in USDC funding, with the idea of that extra 50K in USD funding being expressed for paying people for their work, in addition to the 80K that we already have, not paying work group members specifically, but paying anybody additional. Now, do we know we need all that? No, but we want to make sure that we have a comfortable base to pay people with liquid cash. And then the Jupiter itself, right, all of that will be vested, all 4.5. And again, this has the same symmetry to how much the DAO got from the team. So I think it sets up this lovely relationship where the team funds the DAO, and then the DAO funds these working groups with a similar 10-to-1 ratio. Does that have to be the rule? I don't think so, but I think it is a good precedent. And then all of the Jupe there, so 3 million of that we would split amongst the working group. And then the remaining 1.5 million would also be vested, not going to be liquid. It would be used for long-term incentive alignment for people that help us, essentially. So that means, like, if I need a designer and they stick around for the full year, then that person should probably get a Jupe allocation. If we need admin assistance, and we do need admin assistance, that person should also get a Jupe allocation. There's a nice, 50% essentially of that allocation padding, 50% of what the work group is getting padding, so that we can directly reward people over time.
So actually, I'm going to make a controversial statement here. Okay, it's a very controversial statement and stuff, right? I think I'm going to make a very controversial statement here, and I think here's the thing, right? Is I believe that WGs, not just for CWG, okay, should ask for should make it should have a high level of transparency and clarity about how the rough allocation for the budget, right? How it's going to be used. But I don't think it makes sense to ask them for exact breakdown and things like that, right? Because a big part of WGs is trust, right? And so it's also related to the question of like, how did this CWG come together, right? As I said earlier and stuff, I approached SAP and Slot and Durden, right, to kind of to join this group initially. It wasn't even called Workgroup yet, right? It was just called something, right? Right? And then they recruited Timo, right? So that was how it was started, right? And then but obviously this is not based on and this is based on like years and years of work they did previously, right? And then so essentially I think that the important thing here is that you have the CWG, right? Sorry, let me clarify my thoughts real quick. It is that so basically you have people who have proven, they come in and they do a good amount of things to show that they can do it, right? So sorry, you get people in. So I think the formula for WG is this, right? Is that you get people who have proven that they are reputable, and secondly, they come in, they prove that they can do things, right? And thirdly, you create the right incentives for them to kind of like be able to do it, aka USDC, and the alignment to do it, right? Aka the JUP, right? And actually over here is like, it's very important to understand why we funded the DAO with USDC and JUP, right? USDC is for operational funding, right? That means that you should be able to pay for like, printing or whatever you want to do, right? Or for food, right? Whatever you need, right? Cool. And then the JUP is for alignment, right? That's actually why the USDC should be dispersed like quarterly or whatever makes sense. But then the JUP should be on a longer term vesting schedule, right? And I think those two things are actually pretty interesting, right? Yeah. And lastly is yes, the DAO can actually vote to cut the funding, right? That's actually why the USDC is going to be dispersed like quarterly. And also why the cliff as well, right? Right? Yeah. That's the main thing. Yeah. There's also a question that there's also a thing about what makes sure, like how they make sure the WG does the job. The things that you can't be sure. There's no such thing, right? There's nothing to be sure, right? Like this is life. Life is like unsure, right? Right. So I think so. But what we do know is this, right? It's like if the CWG or any WG, right, ever stops like doing stuff, right, or does such a bad job, then there's always the option, right, of cutting it, right? Right. So if there's enough community feedback that a certain working group is not doing stuff, all right, are not being effective, right? And then we can send do a vote. Right, so I think, and obviously these guys are all like extremely reputable in the space, right? Yeah, so that's how it works stuff. Yep, cool. Let me go on and let me go on to the next question about okay, yeah. So one thing is important here. Cool, great. How if assuming the 24-month vote is valid? I like this question. Assuming the 24-month vote thing is successful, right? Assuming you guys get it, right? Get the vote done. How would you guys basically mentor, like or help new work groups form and ensure that they're formed in the right way and they're accountable and they're successful and things like that? Like how you guys go about it? Also, how do you make sure that you guys get the right people in, to form groups? How do you get that stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can answer this a little bit first. So one thing that we've actually done is that we've been helping Julian with his working group to an extent, because when we had a town hall about 2 weeks ago, we invited him and had him do his own segment there, and he actually killed it. I think I saw more people join during his segment than any other segment, so he did an amazing job. And another thing we did is that me, him, and a cadet by the name of the Great Oboe were working together on a sort of DAO introductory guide. It's like a half pager about the things you need to know to get involved in the DAO immediately today. And I think the answer is just doing things with them, right? Doing things with them that are meaningful and actually move the needle a bit. Because once you accomplish that, once they see that change can be affected and they can do things, they're going to be very excited to get that next hit, right? They're going to be very excited to do that next thing and see that next accomplishment happen before them.
I feel like that's actually a really important thing, because I feel like I did that with you guys, right? Right, to set things up, right? And guys, it wasn't easy, man. Guys, listen to this. It wasn't easy. Like me and Durden and Septic and Slog and Kimbo, we fought a lot, okay? Right, to get this thing done, okay, to get to where we are. We fought a fuck ton, okay? You must know that. Okay? It wasn't easy, okay? It wasn't easy. It wasn't just like we should, hey, vote. No. It was fucking difficult, okay? Can someone attest to that?
We've been in the trenches, man. We've been in the
I
It
trenches.
was difficult.
I
Bro.
think
It was difficult, man. Cat slug.
I think
fighting.
at one point you said I was annoying. So
Come on, you're a fucking break. You're fucking...
So like I think the work group's been up till like 3 a.m. because we're all we're split in time zones, so we've been up till like 3 a.m. working on this proposal almost every single night. It's been a lot of fun and it's been a lot of stress, but yeah, it's good.
Yeah, the proposal and then all the aspects related to the LFG stuff as well, and much more things. Like we've been really in the grind zone, and but it's been really fun at the same time doing this too, and seeing like how, in particular, like the Cats of Culture and the cadets, like how that came about, and like how they really kind of created a strong core of the community as well. So yeah, even though we've been in the trenches, it's been really fun at the same time.
We need more cadets, man. Every day I see so many new cadets coming, awesome people coming up. More cadets. Let's go. More cadets. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think did I touch on the accountability side of things? I think it's pretty important and is a pretty regular question. I think one of the answers is that, well, we have accountability to the DAO and to the team, and obviously, as Meow said, the DAO can vote to like stop the funding or any of that stuff. But I think in the future, the core working group is sort of, we have to build these meaningful accountability systems, and the only way of doing that is sort of going through the processes with more working groups and seeing where those systems are needed. I think if we try to plan systems in a really, really broad scope right now, we're going to find ourselves in a place where those accountability systems actually hurt accountability. Yeah.
I want to say 100% agree. Right? I feel like the whole point here is that no fixed systems. Okay, no fake things, right? We don't do fake stuff here, okay? Right? We don't do fake stuff here. No, we don't. So there's nothing. I feel like there's a lot of things where people we all seen those, right? Guys, come on, let's talk about this thing. It's just very important, right? Grants, right? Someone sets out a grant, right? And then to get the grant, they list out bang, all these different things, right? I'm saying, right? I've been on so many different grant systems whereby someone, in order to get a grant, they list out 20,000 different things they can do, right? So many, right? And then they get it, and then none of those things make sense or ever met, right? Then it's so stupid. It's a stupid game. Forget it. We don't play that game, right? I don't want to play that game, right? It's fucking stupid, right? We don't play that game. It's fucking stupid. Okay. What we do is this. Okay. We find great people that the community trust, right? Julian is a good example. Julian is a great example, right, of someone that has kind of earned the trust of the community, right? Right? And we work with them to scope something out, right? And actually do it, practice it to see whether it works or not, right? And then when it is comfortable, when the scope is done and people trust it and stuff, you put the budget up for a DAO. You get the what you want or what you need. Right, and then cool, and then if there's, and then it should work, right? So that is actually real. That's actually real, right? Not putting up 20 different bullet points, right? And being like, hey, I'm a DAO, hey, grant, hey, accountability. No, we don't do fake stuff here. That's fucking bullshit. Okay, we don't do that here. Okay, so for that reason, I think that there's no point. You guys get it, right? You guys understand what I mean, right? You guys seen all that shit, right? Like you guys put out a grant and 20 different milestones, because guys, people are addicted to fake accountability. It's just one of those things, but we don't do that stuff. Okay, yeah, precisely, we don't do that here. Right? So anyway, if you're interested in being a working group, and we get it, right? Around the for example, there's this guy yesterday that wanted to, I forgot the name, but hello, you want to do a Reddit working group, right? And then yeah, for sure. I think come talk to us and stuff. Come talk to us. We will figure out a good process, right? We'll get started. Right, and then when the results are there and stuff, we'll put on downvote, and then we go from there. Cool. That's a good example to how we do things. Right? And yeah, and in the future we might have a lot more work groups as well. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So we're at 1 hour point. So I will do one last question. Okay. No, we won't do a vote for subreddit. Weird City. It's Weird City. Hello, hey, hello Weird City. Hello. I love you. Thanks for coming up. We are not gonna start the subreddit thing this week. Okay, we are gonna focus on the CWG thing this week. Okay, And once that thing is done, and CWG knows that they're gonna be around for 2 years, right? Does that make sense? Once they know that they're gonna be around for 2 years, right? You know, then I'll work through with them on a good way of creating new work groups. Sounds good? Give me a thumbs up. Let me learn from Cash. Give me a yes. Okay.
If I can add to that really quick, if you guys are interested in work group topics or dynamics, I would talk to Julian because he's going to be running the CAD debt working group. So he's probably the best point of contact at this time, I would say.
No, I disagree with that real quick. And guys, you can see that we disagree on things. Okay, so we disagree on things. Okay, cool. Right. So, but I think from my point of view, I think one good clarification here is that there is no cadet work group yet. Okay?
Yes, correct, correct.
Yes, no good yet. Okay, so we are gonna, and also there are things that we don't really have a good process right now for things, right? So we are gonna have to work through it next week. Okay, Slot, is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Slot. Okay, sounds good, fantastic. All right. So yeah, but definitely let's get this one passed. Cool, we get this one passed. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't be saying that. We finish this vote. Okay, cool, and then we'll figure out rest next on. Okay, yep. Yeah, but really appreciate all the love for the new work groups. Yeah, fucking love it. And after we can brainstorm, and we can just brainstorm and do more stuff, right? Yeah. And I believe this is the entire Cambrian explosion of work groups, Yeah. But Slug, thanks for working on True Things with Slug, man. It's Julian, man. Yeah. How is he to work with? The Julian guy.
Sorry, say again?
How is that Julian guy to work with?
Oh, Julian's pretty good. He's ambitious. I think he really knows how to talk to people as well. So I think there's big things in his future for sure.
Yeah,
Amazing.
I can second that as well. Yeah, Julian is a champ, man.
Julian, give me a chat. J for Julian. I'm trying to be Cash. Give me a J for Julian.
It's not
Well,
J for J means Julian for Julian.
Oh my god, that's so funny. Jup for Julian. Juppers for Julian. Get it? Julian for Jup. Get it? It's funny. J for J. Get it? Oh my god, so many J's. Oh the fuck, shit. All right, one last question, guys. One last question. Okay, I'll end this thing. I think we answered everything quite a bit already. So I'll answer something kind of ask something dumb, right? Do you guys have what do you guys do outside of crypto? Do you guys have any hobbies at all, or you guys just busy being or except just being an A, Slog just being a slug, and Kimo just to be small start, the fighting, right? What do you guys do, besides those things? Yeah.
Oh, I can go on my spare time outside of crypto. I don't know, it feels like I live and breathe Solana, to be honest. So kind of. It's the funny part is it's a passion. It's a passion that became like a professional life. So when I'm doing this, when I'm in the trenches together with you gentlemen here, it's a lot of fun. It's sort of like the same feeling as perhaps when you play a computer game, you're just having fun at the same time. So most of my time is circulated around the Solana stuff.
Slap, go on a date. Get some eggs. Seriously, right? Solana is not get a date or something. Go on Bumble. There's a guy you can let's go.
Yeah, will you give me some dating tips if I do so?
He's asking for dating tips from a cat. No, so I have way too many hobbies, and I think it's actually one of the main reasons I'm in crypto is I actually have a place for all of those hobbies to go into here. So right, I make music, I edit videos, hell, I write some poetry here and there, make websites, I design all sorts of stuff. There's no job in Web 2 where I get to do everything that I want. But in crypto, right, I can make a music NFT and I can do all this other stuff. I can get really geeky on the dynamics of communities and the way they're doing their stuff. And I can put all of them into one little neat crypto flavored box. And it's super sick, makes the whole thing feel like a video game. I like to say that we're basically playing a real life MMORPG. I actually was able to quit video games because crypto is more fun.
That's funny.
Yeah, usually I like tunnel vision stuff, and right now I've been tunnel visioning Web3 for the last few years. But in general, I like smoking meats. I have a smoker, and I'll smoke chicken or
really?
pork and stuff like that. And I'm a fan of trying different woods to use and different techniques. So I like doing that. Also, I like reading Korean manhwa sometimes. So I'll binge a series in a couple hours, yeah. So
also,
comics. I used to be into comics a little bit.
He also reads textbooks cover to cover. There's this one time probably 6 months ago where he read clinical psychology manual on word associations, and it's like 700 pages,
What?
and I think he read it in like a week, and then he dictated it to me for like 4 hours straight, and I feel much smarter because of the slide.
Really?
Yeah,
Why don't I get the treatment? What's wrong with you, Slug?
maybe that's one of the core work groups duties. Like Slorg can read.
Yeah,
to us.
just call a big channel, just cite textbook. It's pretty funny. Yeah. What do you do besides typing?
That's hilarious. I love learning, so I do a bunch of reading, mostly like sciencey nonfiction books, and then I often go to saunas and cold baths, like almost like a light form of exercise, and like clears my mind. So yeah, I enjoy that a lot.
Sauna.
Yeah.
Oh, then those things are rough, man. I can't take it for more than 15 minutes. You know. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you get in a cold bath afterwards though?
Yeah, I try to. I try to actually. I went to Wim Hof. You know Wim Hof thing. I actually went to the mountains. You know the polar mountains to do
Oh
the Wim Hof.
shit! Wow.
Yeah, I did that for like right before pandemic. Yeah, I was like, so I had no training. I just went there, jumped in the pool, you know, and walked the whole ice mountain thing. That's pretty funny.
That's like next level. Like I don't know if I could do that.
Yeah, dude,
But
but
okay.
I was lucky because I think he kind of stopped doing the courses, but I kind of caught the last one he did. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah. Cool. Okay, I think we are good now. All right, guys. Okay, so I think we have a pretty good chat. I think I think if you have been here, I hope this is recorded, so we can then put this online. But anyway, I think sorry.
I was curious, Seb. Is there any questions we didn't cover from the audience that you have written down?
Let's see. But there's some may have covered most of them. Let me see.
Okay, cool.
I think I covered most of it. I kind of want to keep this like to an hour, but I think I keep it an hour. I think if there's any questions and stuff, I think guys will be around for it. You know, just be on the chat, either in general or in which channel are you guys talking about? Which channel are you guys talking in? Jupiter Workgroups?
I think the easiest way to ask questions for us in the core working group is in the Jupiter working group chat. Or in the CAD data.
forum.
But Jupiter
in the
working
CAD
group
data,
chat is
yeah.
specifically the Jupiter working group chat is specifically for the community to be able to communicate directly with us in the working groups. Not only us, but also, for example, the uplink guys, etc. So that's the spot.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, and feel free to ask in the forum as well, right? You know, right, guys?
Yeah.
One last clarification about Workgroups is that I think what is very, very cool about this process, right, is that I think there's a certain gestation period before it goes to a DAO. Right, so you know, like you can, I think that gives us a lot of flexibility in like creating work groups, right? You know, and having the work groups like get started first before going to a DAO, right? You know, I think that process is actually very important. I don't know why most DAOs, why most people don't do it, but I think it's very important. You know, so it's this period of like gestation, right? You know, and I love that. So in summary, you know, I love this interview. Thank you so much. I think I've been working with them for a while now, from way before the Jup launch, right? I think so. I guess one fun story is that I think people were asking me what I was doing before the Jup launch, right? Right, and then besides Launchpad, this is all I was working through, right? And I was really working through a lot of things, right, with everyone, right, before the Jup launch. Right, you know, and then later on, and obviously since then we've been working together a lot of things as well, right? And yeah, so it's great to kind of have everyone be on this call. I hope that everyone got most of the questions answered, right? You know, if there's recording, I'll post it online. And any questions you can please talk in the channel or actually put it in the forum. And Mr. BR, thank you so much, you know, for this comment. I really appreciate what you said. Yeah, because I think, and again, guys, you know this is real because we are here. I'm here, right? You know, like preaching really hard, right? You know, right? And yeah. So I think yeah. So you know it's real. Okay, that's all I'll say. You know it's real. Okay, cool. All right, thanks, guys. Peace out. Let's end this with J. Let's go. This time for Jup. J for J. Let's go. J for J. Let's get Jup in the hands of people that contribute to Jup the most. Okay. J for J. Get Jup in the hands on people who contribute to the most. Okay, J for J. Remember this. Okay, J for J. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.